Hello everybody, today I want to take a little bit of a break from the normal combat tutorials I've been doing recently and instead do a little bit of a overview or a little bit of a speculation on a certain airplane that 1C announced was in development for 2024 in their May 5th developer diary. Now that specific airplane is the TA-152H, as many of you probably have already guessed. It's kind of the airplane that's been kicking up the most dust in the IL-2 community recently, after the announcement of its development in that dev blog. And today I just want to take a little bit of time to discuss kind of how I think the airplane will fit into great battles. I think some of the issues it will have, some of the issues pilots flying it will have. And I also want to talk a little bit about, I think, some of the other things that the addition of the 152H could also implicate or suggest the arrival of. But let's get right into this. I apologize for the little bit of a break in content recently. I was moving and as such didn't have access to my PC or microphone, but today I've got it all set up and I want to jump back in as to not miss too much of a stride and get as much out to you guys before I feel like this is stale or old news. So let's get into it. So, per usual with most of my videos, this one comes with an attached Greg video, but unlike the other ones where there are more suggestions if anybody is interested in the IRL performance and technical data of the airplane, this one is almost required as to understand a lot of the specifics and technical data of the TA-152 and how it operates and why it operates, because a lot of that's going to be tied into what we're talking about here. Because we don't have any in-game performance to really talk about or focus on, we're going to be talking a little bit more about the actual performance and how it relates to how this airplane is going to be received in game and how it's going to perform in game. So I'm going to leave a little drop down menu and I suggest you go watch the whole of that video before coming back to finish this video. Sources on the TA-152H are rare and far between. But this one I have up on the screen has been used by other people in videos relating to this aircraft, so I feel like it's pretty peer-reviewed, and I'm comfortable putting it up and using it in mine. I'm going to compare the 152 speeds at altitudes below 25,000 feet against contemporary Allied fighters, because that's where I find most of the combat in IL-2 happens, particularly in multiplayer. I think I can count on, one hand the amount of fights I've had at 25,000 feet, and, on both hands I can count the amount of fights I've had at 20,000 feet and above. So, and this is kind of my whole hypothesis, is that the 152 will struggle in the current meta of IL-2 because the speeds below 30,000 feet are not phenomenal, especially when compared to other contemporary airplanes. So I'm going to look at the airplane speeds compared to several other fighters at increments of 5,000 feet. So we're going to start at 5,000. We're going to start on the deck, and then we're going to go 5,000, 10,000, 15,000, 20,000, and 25,000, and compare the airplane up through there. So there's a lot of these charts are mismatched in terms of the measurements or the measurement units. So when I convert kilometers per hour to miles per hour, or miles per hour to kilometers per hour, or feet to kilometers for altitude, or kilometers to feet, I will make a little note there so that we can just keep congruency, and that people who don't know one system or the other system super well can still make sense of it. So let's get into this. And the first airplane we're going to start off with is the Tempest. In hindsight, while editing this video altogether, I realized it was probably smart to give a base mark of the 152's speeds at the altitudes we're going to be discussing. So here it is. Each of the altitude breaks is marked in a different color on the graph. My MS Paint skills are rather poor, so you'll have to excuse it. But the speed and the altitude is indicated in the in both imperial and metric measurements. You'll have to excuse me, my metric viewers, because I'm leading with the imperial variants here, because I'm an American and it's more natural to me. But anyway, both are options, and here you go. Hopefully this makes it a little bit clearer before we add in a second factor of a second airplane. So another clarifying thing before we get into looking at the actual speed numbers here. Instead of putting up the chart of the 152 compared to the chart of the other airplane, which I think would be a little distracting, I'm going to denote the 152 speed ratings at each given altitude in blue text, and then whatever airplane we're comparing it to will be in white text. And I'm going to put up the graph of the allied airplane because we've already seen the 152. So the technical side of this Tempest that I'm comparing it to, I couldn't find one in the later configuration that you can get in game with the Sabre 2A engine with 11 pounds of boost. So we're going to use a Tempest in an earlier configuration running 9 pounds of boost, but it serves as a good baseline because the performance of the upgraded one is just, generally better, particularly at lower altitudes, if I remember correctly, but correct me if I'm wrong on that. Anyway, on the deck, the Tempest does 375 miles per hour. Compared to the 360 of the 152. And as we go up to 5,000 feet, we're looking at 408 miles per hour compared to 382. And these are estimated. There could be slight differences and, slight inaccuracies here, but these are relative. And as we get up to 10,412 compared to 388, if we hit 15, we're doing 418 in the Tempest, and the Fokker-Wulf is doing 407. We get up to 20,000, and this is where the Tempest really kind of peaks out. We're doing 436 miles per hour, and the 152 is doing 425. And then by the time we hit 25,000 feet, the 152 was overtaken the Tempest. It's doing 434 miles per hour, while the Tempest is only doing 429. This data makes sense. The Tempest is a phenomenal low-altitude airplane with a lot of horsepower and a lot of speed at lower altitudes. And you can see specifically the speed difference below 15,000 feet, it's pretty decent. So if the Tempest catches a 152 at that altitude, it's going to be able to dictate the fight really well. So if the 152 pilot is playing at the wrong altitude really to get the most out of his airplane, or if the Tempest catches him climbing, the 152 is really in trouble. And it's unfortunate because the 152 in the current meta of the game is fitting a square peg into a round hole. Until 1C adds some sort of, higher altitude, Allied bomber where you're going to be able to, have those things coming in at 30,000 feet where their fighter escort is coming in at 35,000 feet. The 152 is going to, be in this kind of conundrum for, most of its, engagements. But, however, I don't want to harp too much on, one airplane, and I don't want to make this video way too long. So let's move on to the next set of airplanes. And I'm going to do these two together because they're the same airframe. They have a different engine. You probably already guessed what it is. It's the Spitfire, the Mark 9 and the Mark 14. So I'm going to just do two data sets below the numbers for the TA-152, and we'll talk about that right now. So let's move into that. So let's look at the stats of the two Spitfire variants against the 152. And the 152 is retaining its blue color for its stats, while the Mark 14 Spitfire is going to use white, and the Mark 9 will use orange. You can see that on the deck, the TA and the Mark 14 are tied, while the Mark 9 is a little bit farther behind. And by 5,000 feet, the same thing is true. The TA and the Mark 14 are still tied at, 382 miles per hour, while the Mark 9 is still trailing behind, and it will continue to trail behind for the entirety of this section. At 10,000 feet, you get 388 miles per hour out of the TA-152, while you're getting 406 miles per hour out of the Mark 14 and only 378 out of the Mark 9. By the time you're hitting 15, you've got the respective airframes going 407 miles per hour, 416, and 385. By 20,000 feet, the TA-152 briefly overtakes the Mark 14 in terms of speed at lower altitudes, going 425 compared to 423, while the Mark 9 is only going 407. However, by 25,000 feet, the Mark 14 has regained in a significant 10 mile per hour difference, and it's going 444 miles per hour, while the TA-152 is doing 434, and the Mark 9 is only doing 408. Before we get into the next airplane, which is the P-47, I just want to say that the Mark 14 Spitfire is actually one of the Allied airplanes on this list that's competitive in terms of speed with the 152 all the way up through 30,000 feet. At 30,000 feet, I believe it's roughly doing 440 miles per hour. Anyway, let's move into the P-47D. And so Oddly enough, for an Allied airplane that was produced in wide numbers, I struggled to find a lot of performance data in terms of speed for the P-47D-28 that we have in game. Now, what I did find was a P-47D chart, and when I checked the serial number that's up there beside the aircraft type, I found out it's a D-22, which exists in game as part of, you can get it as part of the Normandy expansion. So, like we did with the Tempest earlier, we're going to use the earlier version as a base mark, and then I've got a couple other documents that I think will help, estimate kind of what the D-28 will look like. So you can see on the deck, the P-47D-22 does 347 miles per hour and is, slower than the 152. And at 5,000 feet, it's still slower than 152 at 374 miles per hour compared to 382. By the time you hit 10,000 feet, though, you're doing, a solid 8 miles per hour faster than the 152 is. And then by 15,000 feet, you're still faster, 418 miles per hour compared to 407. At 25,000 feet, you've extended your speed gap out by to a solid, 10 miles per hour, 435 miles per hour compared to 425. And then the D-22 stops being faster than the 152 at 25,000 feet, where it's only doing 430 miles per hour compared to 434 miles per hour. However, this document I found talking about the differences between the D, the M, and the N versions of the P-47 denotes that the D-30 variant was able to achieve 443 miles per hour of top speed at 29,000 feet. And since the D-30 and the D-28 only differ in terms of the addition of air brakes on the D-30 and some internal cockpit rearrangings, and do not differ in terms of engine performance, I think we can estimate that at 25,000 feet, the D-28 will be relatively at the same speed that the 152 is able to achieve. All right, let's move on to the P-51, which I'm sure is one of the more anticipated aircraft of this comparison. So this is a P-51D running with 150 octane fuel with the -7 Packard Merlin engine, so very similar to the D15 that we have in game. I'm not sure if it's a D15, but it's running the same settings. Anyway, 370 miles per hour on the deck compared to 360. You got 390 at 5,000 feet compared to 382. By 10,000 feet, the Stang is doing 410, and the Focke-Wulf design is doing 388, starting to gap the airplane a little bit. 415 at 15,000 feet. The Focke-Wulf's caught up a little bit more. It's at 407. The biggest gap comes at 20,000 feet, where you're doing 442 miles per hour in the Mustang compared to 425 miles per hour in the TA-152. You're almost 20 miles per hour faster than your opposition. By 25,000 feet, the -7 version of the Merlin starts to lose some performance, and you're doing 430 miles per hour compared to 434. I also just because it's in the game and you can rig it to be an incredible speed demon, want to talk about, or just want to bring up this graph on the P-51B running a -7 engine and 81 inches of manifold pressure, or 25 pounds of boost, as the British measure it. That airplane below 10,000 feet is an absolute speed demon, and so if you get caught down there against that airplane in the 152, well, I wish you the best of luck, because there's no running. All right, well, that's the conclusion of kind of the nitty-gritty numbers part, I guess. And I've left off a couple airplanes on that list that I just don't see being used very frequently in a dedicated air-to-air role. And I understand that, speed isn't everything, but to me, in later war scenarios, speed dictates a lot of fights. It dictates your ability to take a fight. It dictates your ability to really disengage from a fight a lot of the time. And I also don't really have the data or the numbers on the TA-152's climb rate or its turn rate or what its acceleration was like to really compare those things. So speed is all I can offer. Anyway, when I look at this, when I look at the speed numbers, what I see is that the TA-152, against most airplanes, doesn't have the speed at the altitudes that matter. Now, when I say the altitudes that matter, I don't mean the altitudes that mattered in real life, in the real conflict, and in the real role that the airplane was designed for. I mean the altitudes that matter in IL-2 multiplayer combat. So what I've done is I've mapped out 47 kills that I picked up between May 6th through May 9th, and then May 12th through May 16th. May 6th is the starting date because that's the day after the developer diary, and I thought, you know what, I should, track my kills here to see kind of like where the altitudes that they're happening at are, because like I want to see if, I'm getting a lot in the altitude where, the 152 is going to be good. And there's a break between May 10th and May 11th because that's the days I was moving. Anyway, my apologies for the little break, but it's 7 days worth of data and there's 47 kills, like I said. Anyway, the interesting thing to note is look how much of these, all of these kills, minus one, happen below 20,000 feet, and the vast majority of the kills happen below 10,000 feet. Even in airframes that are, we think of as being more geared towards high altitude. Like on May 14th, there's 3 kills in the D9. All of them are below 10,000 feet. 2 of them are almost on the deck, 1 is at about 9,000 feet. It's the same thing with the P-47D-28. I've got 1 kill on May 7th at about 8,000 feet, 1 kill on May 12th at about, 3,000 feet, and 1 kill on May 15th, literally almost on the deck. And I know people will say, well, is that just because, you're not taking the airplanes to altitude, so all the combat you do see is going to be, the data is going to be biased because you're not going to high altitudes, you're staying on the deck, so, you only have the potential to see combat on the deck. No, I try to take the airplanes to, I at least try to get over 15,000 feet in almost every single airplane prior to taking a fight, because I want altitude, because altitude translates into potential energy. So the problem is that I go to these altitudes, but then I end up diving on targets because all the targets are on the deck. Why? It's kind of like, I think, to me at least, it's a mix of multiple things. I think it's a mix of, people are lazy, they don't really want to climb. And 2, a lot of objectives in multiplayer servers are like ground strike based, so to protect them or to strike them, you kind of have to be low to the deck, which draws people down. There's some maps that have, bombers that have to be intercepted, that come in at 16,000 feet. I'd like 1C to add some more bomber types like the B-17, the B-24, because there isn't really potential to kick up the kinds that we have or the types that we have to higher altitudes. Most of the missions that include B-26s or B-25s have those airplanes operating at kind of their combat ceiling, so there's no way to bring them any higher. Anyway, I digress. You can see here the majority of these kills on the deck, and that's what I mean by where it matters. Between 20,000 feet and the deck, the 152, as we've just seen, doesn't really have the speed compared to contemporary airplanes, and as such, in my opinion, is going to struggle in most current, or in the current multiplayer meta, because it's going to struggle to dictate or to disengage from combat compared to contemporary allied airplanes. Now, I'm not saying that the 152 is a bad airplane in its element. It is probably the best in its field. In high altitude performance, it is unmatched. Above 35,000 feet, there's not an allied airplane that can lay a hand on it, and up to 35,000 feet, the only one that can really is the P-47M, which isn't in IL-2. So I'm not saying this is a bad airplane, but I'm saying that I perceive, or I hypothesize at this point with the data that I have, that it's going to struggle in the current meta of how, IL-2 multiplayer plays. Now, I think if 1C were to add, B-17s or B-24s that came in at 25,000 feet, and, their escorts were flying at 30,000 feet, it might be a very different story, because then, and if the maps, including those bombers, were a lot more prevalent, so it wasn't like 1 out of every, 10 maps, but it was maybe 1 out of every 4 maps or something included some sort of bomber thing, that would shift it to be a lot more useful, right? But I think in the current meta, it's gonna struggle a little bit, and I think a lot of people are gonna get caught out on their way trying to climb up to altitude. A lot of people are gonna misuse it. I think there's gonna be a lot of complaining about this airplane because a lot of people are gonna misunderstand it, and I think that, I don't know, I will certainly purchase this airplane in whatever pack it comes in, because I think it's a very cool and unique airplane. But I think that for the wide majority of it, IL-2 pilots, there's going to be a little bit of a disconnect between how the airplane, is hyped to perform in games like, War Thunder, and how the airplane will actually perform in, a real live, combat scenario within, IL-2. Where, it's maybe a little bit more hardcore. Anyway, I don't know. I have mixed opinions on this airplane, and I'm curious to hear everybody else's opinions on how they think it's going to work. I've got a couple hypotheses about some of the other performance, aspects of it. I'm not too, like, what's the word, positive about, the potential for its ability to really turn. I think the wings are gonna kind of limit it in that way. Those wings are designed to have low drag at incredibly low indicated airspeeds, and they have a lot of drag at high indicated airspeeds. So I think on the deck where you're operating at higher indicated airspeeds, it's gonna be a very draggy airplane that loses energy incredibly quickly, especially in a turn. I don't know. Anyway, this is all hypotheses. I hope you guys have enjoyed this. Thank you for the great reception on the last couple of videos. And between, I think, when I got home what had been last Thursday, and today, Sunday, May 21st, when I'm about to put this video out, I think we've almost hit 5,000 views on the Spitfire video, which is an incredible thing. And I've gone from having 2 subscribers to having almost 50. So thank you everybody for your incredible support, and please let me know what you guys think about the 152. And of course, the next video I'll get back into the actual combat tutorials, and I'll put up a community survey, a poll for what airframe everybody would like to see. But I've got a couple, and if you have any specific ones, let me know in the comments. Well, that's it for today's video, and I apologize for the delay, like I said earlier. But I'll leave everybody with this clip of the TA-152's little brother, the Dora 9, attacking an IL-2 attack aircraft on the Kuban map. And like the saying goes, you either got to kill the pilot or you got to kill the engine on the IL-2, because that thing doesn't go down. Thank you everybody for the massive support. Like I said earlier, it's been huge, and I hope everybody has a good day, and I'll see you around.